So what I like to do after every game is to do a little bit of a thoughts and reviews before, like afterwards, and I just talk about things I liked or disliked about the game for a bit, and then I end the stream. And since we do have time, we are actually ahead of time. Actually, Dragon Quest Three Goon. Oh, what? Someone on the others. So actually, the chat would be normally be down below you guys, but it's broken, so you can't see the comment. It's the Chinese streaming service that I also stream to at the same time. I think one of the users is actually like Dragon Quest 3. Let's go, go on. I'm like, no, we can't do it. 不可以，斗恶龙三不能现在开始。So I was just saying to the chatter that like, no, I can't start it now. It's gonna take too long. I'm like, wait, no, we're not gonna do DQ3 right now. I know. So people were. I'm sure people wanted to know to watch that. But anyway, I'll talk about DQ3 when we actually played it. I haven't scheduled it yet, but I will in a bit. Probably soon. Maybe not soon. I don't know. So, all right. So generally with a review of games like this, like Dragon Quest 2, I usually do it. We use like with reviews since for RPGs, I generally go with these four criteria. I usually do talk about the story, graphics, sound, and gameplay. I think that covers usually the essences of like most most RPGs, not just Japanese ones, of course. So I guess we'll just get started. This review is not going to be very long because the game's not very long, so not as much material to work with. But the story for Dragon Quest 2, I mean, look, it's 1987. What did you like? If you were expecting coming into an old Dragon Quest game and expecting a massive story full of intrigue and politics and romance, well, you're probably a few years too early for that. So the story is very simple. Hargon's doing stuff. You need to stop him, but you need to get some party members to help you, unlike in the previous game where you fought the Dragon Lord all by yourself, all by your lonesome. I mean, there's flavor text from the NPCs, but I mean, it's all really standard fare if you look beyond the Elizabethan English. So it's certainly not going to win the most original story, but I mean, at the time, this was the 80s, so they were just like getting into the like the concept of just having like an RPG, like it's just like a fun way to like fight monsters and gain EXP because they were building on the work that had been done for like West, like RPGs from the West, like US and UK, that had been done on the computers, and they wanted to bring that kind of experience to the Japanese public, and then kind of it ended up coming to us again, which is kind of funny. It's inspired by Western RPGs, and then eventually made its way to the West in the end. And yeah, West being North America and Europe, of course. So it's just kind of funny that it ended up that way. But yeah, the story is really simple. I mean, it's nothing really special. I mean, the only thing is like that's a little bit more interesting is that they had one of the characters' parents like die early on, and it was like, wow, that's pretty like they wanted to amp up the dramatic part of the game before they compare to Dragon Quest 1, where you're just kind of like, you're a dude. The king is sending you to take care of that pesky dragon lord, and then you just find a way to get to the pesky dragon lord and take care of him. But in this game, it's like, well, we need to kill. Well, it's a little more complicated. Well, our princess is screwed, and then you have to go find her. But before you do that, you have to try to chase after the silly Prince Randolph, not Prince Randolph, Prince of Cannock, I guess, because his name's random, by the way. And they try to give there's a little more to it than just that. And the nice thing is, like, you don't fight they had, like, I think this is the game that introduced, like, a final boss with two forms rather than one. Because the first one, I think you just fought the Dragon Lord straight up, right? Or would you fight... I'm forgetting now. No, he had a second form. Never mind. It's not the first game with second forms. But yeah, the world's more expansive, and you even got to explore a little. You actually got to see the world of Dragon Quest 1 too. Like it's part of the map in this game. Of course, it's much smaller than it is in Dragon Quest One, but it's actually a nice little throwback as well. So like, yeah, the story is it's serviceable. It's enough to get you like amped to take on Hargon because he totally screwed one kingdom over. He was like, nope. And unfortunately, it had to be the princess's kingdom, so of course it's a bit more urgent than it was in the previous game. So yeah, simple story, nothing to write home about, but it's the '80s. Don't expect too much. Graphics wise, I guess I'll have to talk about. I mean, we have to consider that, of course, this is an old game, and like they're using old RPG, older like a sprite style that's more reminiscent of like actually it's like not really Super Nintendo because that's a little bit too. I guess it looks a bit more like what the DS for games look like, but it's I don't know. I personally don't think the sprite like it's not the nicest looking. I don't know how to explain it. It just looks. I don't know if it scales that well, and it looks it's all right looking. I mean, I certainly don't think it looks bad. Like there's a lot of reviewers who are saying like, "Oh, it's awful," but like, I don't think it looks that bad. It's just I think the frame rate's the one that bothers me the most, is because like it's not really smooth when you walk on it, and like this is a Switch, it can run this game. This is not a game that requires a ton of processing power, like that. This game was running on iPhones fours and threes. Like, come on. This game does not take power. So it's really not a power problem. It's more like they didn't really do a good job of like optimizing it. So yeah, it's just like the little things that kind of finagle, and like the font is a little bit plain. It's not very interesting to look at. It's clear enough. And I mean like and that's nice and all, but it just feels like it's definitely a mobile port, and they kind of put not too much effort into it, other than like, yeah, they localized it. So it definitely could have been better for a port. It's certainly nice looking in comparison to, well, I mean, you could go to the Famicom or the NES versions, and of course has way more colors. And like the sprites are bigger than they are in the Super Nintendo version. Yes, there was actually a Super Famicom version, so on the Sufami, it does scroll. It actually scrolls better than this game. So that's just like you had it scrolling nicely in the Super Famicom, which is way a whole how many generations behind the Switch, and you can't even get it to scroll properly on even mobile phones. Even mobile phones can outclass a Super Famicom in power, and like they couldn't even get the scrolling right. It's just like, come on, that's so lazy. So it does feel a little bit like, this port it's a bit lazy. So I don't know if it's the best representation for graphics wise, but it does look nice enough, and like it looks fine enough. I don't think it's unplayably bad. It's just not as smooth as it could be. I feel like, yeah, it's just there's just things they could have done to make it a little look nicer. I mean, like you look at this and then you look at like let me think. What was a good example? Like something like Octopath Traveler, and you're just like night and day, right? And Octopath Traveler is on this same system, and I'm not expecting it to look like Octopath Traveler, but it should look at least a bit more presentable. And so yeah, that's just stuff like that. And yes, if you play on PS4, it's the same problem. It looks exactly like this, so it makes no difference if you try to play the PSN version. And besides, that version is in Japanese. You can't even play it the English version in PSN, which is kind of weird too. So, but overall, I mean, most of the things are pretty readable. Like the graphics are so simple that you don't have difficulty distinguishing what's interactable and what's not. The nice thing is they added the exclamation points, so it's very easy to tell what you can interact with. I think was there anything else that like I don't think there's anything like I'm actually one of the nice things about simple games with simple graphics is that it's very readable. You don't have this problem of like I can't tell what I'm walking next to, or like I don't know if it's interactable or not that you can have with some modern, even some modern games too. Some modern games are not even that, are kind of not good about like messaging like what's interactable. I mean, there's ways to do it now because of how complicated all graphics have, like the graphics for RPGs have become. But back in the old days, it was like it's nice. You can add these little touches to make it easy to tell what you can interact with. Super nice. Anything else? No, I guess that's pretty much it for graphics. The sound is, well, it's traditional Dragon Quest. So the compositions sound different than they did in the original Famicom. Obviously, they're taking advantage of the fact that you don't need to use a synthesizer. But like, so the way it's synthesized, it sounds fine, and like I don't. I mean, the tracks are still good, even if they're not a fully orchestrated soundtrack. Like, for instance, Dragon Quest 8 or 11. But it does still sound pretty nice because I mean they're classics. They're classic songs. I don't know if the music in two is as good as it was in one. I actually think I still think the ones in one are more memorable. But like it's certainly not like, oh man, I really hate this music, or like I think like the class. It's just classic. It's classic Dragon Quest, and they did a good job of having this like bombastic feel. Whereas like like it's very different from the approach that like Final Fantasy does, which is more, I don't know, like Final Fantasy, like Nobuo Uematsu sensei has a different approach to Final Fantasy. I'm not a musician, by the way, so I don't know what the heck I'm talking about. But I mean, like I can just tell the feel is very different. Where that's like Uematsu is more of like the it's really hard to, it's like very moody, and like it's a totally different than like kind of like how Dragon Quest is like more bombastic and of a sense of adventure. It's like it's really cool, and I actually really like hearing the contrast between like a Dragon Quest and like a classic Final Fantasy. It's kind of nice. It's nice to have this like, you're out on a grand adventure, or like you're going through something really thrilling. So I actually really like that a lot, like this classic feel. And then like, so you definitely get a sense of that here in even this game, even Dragon Quest 2. Even if the tracks I don't think are as good, but they still evoke that same feeling of like I am playing a Dragon Quest. I am on a grand adventure to save this world. And the sounds are always classic Dragon Quest. What can I say? I can always tell you that the sounds are very like so distinct that you hear it and like that's Dragon Quest. And that's why I really like about this game series is like this like hold to like the tenets, the traditions, and so you always hear the sound music. You're like, that's Dragon Quest, and so I actually really like that a lot about this. Like it gives the game a lot of the series a lot of character, and in this game they're just as it's just as fun to listen to all the silly sounding like things like when you cast a spell or you fight monsters. And then of course, like the monster. I mean, I don't. The monsters don't actually have sounds, so yeah, they didn't add that to this game, which is kind of interesting. What was I gonna say again? But yeah, I actually did like. I think the sound design is always one of Dragon Quest's stronger aspects because you can tell like it invokes that feeling when you play the game, and I like it a lot. And that was definitely one enjoyable while I was making the playthrough. Oh right. And finally, gameplay. Well, it's classic. That's all. That's like if you want to sum up this part, it's just like it's classic. So there, for the most part, it's really hard to like. This game was designed to be like you can kind of figure out where to go. There were a couple of times I kind of got a little lost. So I mean, there's not one thing about this game is that there's I guess it's expected that you would have bought a guide from somewhere, or like you have a magazine and they're like, you want to play Dragon Quest 2, get the magazine so you can find out how to get through the game. And they're like, so some of the stuff to get progress is a little bit obtuse. And also like get not have like there was that time where I was like, how come I can't get to the final area? How do I do this? They keep saying I should come here, but I don't know. And that was like one of those times where like, oh, you have to go down and oh, this game. But like But generally, I think the game's linear in comparison to one where you could literally go anywhere at your peril. So like you don't I don't I we survived for the most part without having to look at the guide too much. There was a couple only maybe a couple of times when we got stuck. So it's not as it's totally doable. But I think one of the annoying things is that yeah, item inventory is a huge issue in this game of course. Like because you're working with so little space. You don't have a lot to care you can carry, so it's actually kind of frustrating sometimes to like, oh, what am I gonna do? I have too many items, and you have to rearrange it. And you saw in the end where because you don't know whether or not you were so incentivized to hide an item that like not hide an item. You're incentivized to like deposit your items so you'll have item space. But because of that, we actually ended up having to go to the final dungeon two times, 2 or 3 times because we're like, oh, whoops, I didn't know I needed this. I guess I gotta go back and get it. Oops, I didn't think I needed this. Oh, I guess I have to go back and get it. And yeah, it was just like, oh my goodness, that was just kind of silly. And you guys saw it in the last stream about it. It was kind of like, wow. Oh, jeez. So like inventory still a big issue even in this version of the game, and yeah, just finding things. I think the dungeons for the most part are fair enough length. I think the only one I think was the worst one was the Cave of Hargon, like or the Cave of to get you to Ratatak. Name is really long. To the final areas, that cave that was like 5 or 6 floors, that took a while, and it was just kind of really annoying. I think that's probably the worst dungeon in the game because it's so long. Because you need a lot of resources, and it's getting through there is like really like what, and the enemies in there can like kill you. And we got wiped there once because we didn't because we just got a really bad formation, and then it's just like we just got really owned. It was really bad. And so like it's just that stuff where and also the encounter rate gets really insane near the like to some of those dungeons, and I honestly it's like super annoying. It's kind of bad. Like I was complaining about a different games, Sword and not Sword and Fairy, Shunyuan Sword, which I actually played as a special, and it also has a similar problem. But apparently, like the game gets so easy by the time because the encounter rate, ironically, actually makes it easier because you get so many enemies, you level up so quickly enough, so then the enemies become trivial. But in this game, like they're never really trivial because you don't level up as fast. So you're just like, oh my goodness, I have to fight another like killing machine, for instance. Those killing machines are like terrifying, and like there's just these terrifying encounters, and you keep running into them, and it's super annoying. So like the encounter rate is just a little bit too high. But I mean, I understand it's the '80s, so it's understandable. So that was how they wanted to lengthen the game. So it's just an old game. And so yeah, the otherwise the battle very traditional, very it's turn based. You guys should be familiar with this if you've played any RPGs from Japan or China. I guess China also kind of has this like a lot. Some of the Chinese games we've played on this stream have actually gotten their gameplay very much inspired by this game series. So like Shen Sword is very much inspired, actually by Dragon Quest 2. There's a lot of mechanics in that game are really similar to the ones here in this game, and and like and like even like Let Sword and Fairy are the series we played a bunch of games in already, like about 7. Yeah, are very much inspired by this game. Like the early entries are very much inspired by this game series. Like not completely, not all the way, as in like it looks almost the same, but like it is very much inspired by like yeah, a lot of turn-based RPGs are based very much took a lot of their cues from Dragon Quest. So it's cool that we get to play some a piece of history, and they're actually still pretty fun. Even yeah, this Switch versions like these modern versions of Dragon Quest 1 and 2 are still definitely playable. So yeah, in terms of gameplay, it's traditional. It's fun, even if there are some things that I don't like as much about it. But you know, Like you kind of like accept these things because they're old. It's from an old game. What are you expecting? They're not gonna do revamp the entire battle system. Like, because then it wouldn't. I guess yeah, because Dragon Quest is so connected to like the core tenets of its game design. So like, it would be really weird to play it. I mean, that'd be a spin-off essentially, which there exists, like Dragon Quest Musou or Dragon Quest Warriors. Do we even have that? Did I ever release in the US? I think it did. Yeah. Or like Dragon Quest Swords, for instance, which was more like Punch Out. It was that game was fun too. That was like the first spin-off of Dragon. Actually, you know, it's kind of funny. I actually beat a spin-off of Dragon Quest before I actually beat a Dragon Quest main game, and I was like sacrilege, I know. But I had Dragon Quest Swords on the Wii, and that was a lot of fun. You actually got to swipe the Wiimote to beat it, and you had to swipe kill enemies that way. So it's actually kind of funny that that's actually the first Dragon Quest game I've beaten. Oh, you gotta go to bed. Yeah, don't worry about it. I'm about to wrap up the review. So, yeah, take care, Hikaru, and have a good night. Thanks for stopping by. Hope you stop by for the other for a future stream too. Oh, let's see. What was I saying again? Bye. So, so yeah, the gameplay is pretty traditional. It's like you can see the foundations of the genre here. Especially this is the first one with party members. So the party members actually does help a lot. Because the original, like, you were one person, if you fell asleep, you were just like, oh my gosh. Can you wake up? No. But in this game you actually have party members to support you, so it can actually add a new different dynamics to the battles. So I kind of appreciate that they've built upon that. I know it's kind of funny we take like Japanese art a party in Japanese RPG. Oh, that's normal. I'm like, nah. This is the first game that did it. This did it even before Phantasy Star, which we actually have played already. But that was actually innovative. Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I hope we get to meet again. And yeah, so it's actually like you get to play a piece of history, and I think that's really cool. And I mean, it's dated, but yeah, it's the first one to do it. Without this, there wouldn't be any other the foundations for later games, not only in Dragon Quest, but like for other Japanese RPGs as well. So yeah, I guess after now that those four criterias are covered, what do I think of the game as a whole? I feel like, well, I guess it really depends. Like, I guess if you're new to RPGs, it's actually not that bad of a starting point. It's not very long, as you can tell, since we really did beat it in like less than like no, seriously, I think it's only been like yeah, it's like 2 weeks, and that's because we were playing slowly. So like you could actually honestly beat most of it and beat it in a weekend if you're fast enough, or you could beat it over for like 4 days or some of just playing casually. It's really not that long. I think it's like 10, 12 hours, I guess. And it's like it's a good one to do because it's the combat is very simple. It's very easy um to understand the battle system, so it's not no complicated stuff. You don't need to learn about a billion equipment systems or like some ability systems or like there is a lot of complicated like progression systems is what we call them in the game industry for like RPGs, but this one is very very dead simple. You just get new better weapons, get better armor. And yeah, I think the simplicity is actually might be one of the best parts of the game is that it's not hard to understand. And so it's actually really good for like beginners who want to just like play something. I think the only thing that might be to its detriment is that it's hard to figure out where to go because it's not really like I don't think it's expressed very well. You can kind of figure it out from talking to a lot of NPCs, but you're sort of like not really sure at some points in time. And of course, we got lost a couple of times, so that is one thing to consider. So maybe it's not the friendliest in that sense. And there are some things like inventory management that might get really annoying for new players who are not savvy about it. But overall, like I mean, like the nice thing is that I forgot to mention this when I talk about gameplay is that um when you die in this game, you don't lose your EXP, and that's actually really important, really nice that they were smart. They were like, nah, we won't punish. We'll punish like the only penalty for dying is that you lose half your money. And even the game is like there's actually a lot of sophisticated stuff like you can deposit your money so you don't lose it when you die. So you actually can it's always so that like you can always have you never have negative progress. I think the only negative progress is that you lose money, but you always keep your EXP. And that means that even if you die in like a dungeon after like you fought your way up and you just got really unlucky, you'll still have all your EXP, so you'll still be stronger than when you started the dungeon. So when you come back into the dungeon, you're stronger, so you'll be able to take on the challenges of the dungeon much better. So I actually think that's actually really cool that they've actually managed to have a fail-safe for players who are not more or new to RPGs. And actually that's why this series is actually maybe a good one, because like unlike other Japanese RPGs, like some series where there is no forgiveness, so you die, and you have to start over from like your last save point. This game is like, like you keep all your EXP, but you take a penalty, but it's not the most massive penalty unless you don't use the systems properly. I mean, yeah, losing half your money does suck, but I mean, you still got a lot of EXP, and yeah, EXP is king, so the higher level you are, the better, and like it's just a very simple system that works. So if you're new to RPGs, it's actually a good one to play. If you're like a veteran, I guess maybe you would just play it for nostalgia. Either you're nostalgic for it, or you're just like maybe nostalgic for this type of game, or you're just like, I don't know, you're just like, I want to play a piece of history, because like honestly, it's not really going to offer you anything that hasn't already been, that won't already be in other RPGs that came later, or even other Dragon Quest entries. But it's actually a good one to start with if you're like new to RPGs, and I mean, there are other choices as well, but could be one of them. It's not very complicated, which is super nice. And so I still would recommend it. I recommend it just also solely because it's not long. You don't need a huge time commitment like some of these modern RPGs too. And like it's super easy to learn. And the nice thing about it is that has good availability. So as of right now, of course, I mean things could change later in the future, but as of now, with the Switch version out, it's actually very easy to get a copy of it. You can also get a copy on your mobile phone if you don't have a Switch, and of course you'll have to play it with the really narrow view, but it's still very much playable even on mobile. And of course, if you're really old school, you can always go back to the NES version, but that's I don't know if you those things are quite old, so some of them most likely will work. It's just that you may not have the best access to that nowadays, and you might just go for the Switch version because it's way easier to get a Switch than it is to get an NES. Well, actually, that's not necessarily true. It depends, because there's been some supply issues with the Switch recently. But anyway, that's as of this streaming. So yeah, I recommend it. I really enjoyed my time, even in spite of some of the silliness and some of the less fun parts. And oh yeah, there is one thing I should mention. Don't ever wear cursed equipment. One thing that this game will teach you is that not all armor and weapons are there for your benefit. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is, because read the description of all the items, and I think they want to make sure you do that. Because some will tell you that it is clearly probably cursed. So do not put any cursed equipment on. Don't do what I did. I did it for you guys to show you that what happens if you did. So yeah, recommend it. I would say it's like a thumbs up rent. It's rent if you could rent it, which you can't, but it's so cheap. Like it's really, really cheap to get these games too on the Switch version or even the mobile version. So it's really low cost. It's easily available, and it's very simple. So yeah, I definitely recommend giving it a try if you're interested in the foundation of Dragon Quest. Like foundation of Japanese RPGs. Cool. So yeah, for historic purposes, go for it if you're interested. Even if you're not like super into RPGs, and you want to get like a good understanding of the foundation. So yeah, recommended. Good job. Good job, Dragon Quest. Always a fun time. And that's why we'll keep playing the later entries in the series. Alright, well, guess that's the end of the review. I've talked a lot.